Nobody in that courtroom gallery expected a 12-year-old to be the one who made the room go cold. But that's exactly what happened the day Tyler Mason strolled in wearing his AirPods Max, scrolling his phone like he'd wandered into a food court instead of a courtroom. Sneakers worth more than most people's car payment squeaking against the floor. He didn't look at the woman he'd wronged. He didn't look at anyone. Within minutes, that same boy would trigger one of the most talked about rulings in televised courtroom history, a clip that would rack up more than 80 million views and turn one judge's fury into something parents and teachers still quote to this day. If stories about accountability finally catching up to entitled kids are your thing, go ahead and subscribe now. This one earns it. Before we get to the moment Tyler called a sitting judge a Karen and accused her of boomer energy, you need the backstory. Because this case was never really about a ruined flower bed. It was about a mother who'd forgotten how to say no, an elderly woman who had finally run out of patience, and a judge who had spent 25 years learning exactly when patience should run out. Tyler wasn't born entitled. He was raised into it, one unchecked outburst at a time. His parents' divorce 3 years earlier had left his mother, Jennifer, scrambling to hold the family together with the only tool she trusted: money. Tyler's father had relocated for work not long after the split and had seen his son barely a handful of times since. And every canceled visit or unanswered call left a crack in Tyler that nobody in his life knew how to fill. Jennifer filled it the only way she knew, with things. New phones before the old ones wore out, sneakers that cost more than her car payment, a TikTok account with 50,000 followers that she never once looked at closely enough to notice what her son was actually posting. Video after video of him mocking teachers, taunting neighbors, laughing at adults who tried to correct him. When the school called about his fourth suspension in 2 years, Jennifer didn't ask what Tyler had done. She called the school unfair to creative kids. When neighbors complained, she told her son to brush off the haters, borrowing the same language he used to dismiss his own critics online. Behind the scenes, she'd quietly paid out nearly $7,000 over 18 months to make 3 separate incidents disappear before they became anyone's official problem: a smashed car window, a torched shed, a vandalized mailbox. Every check bought silence. None of them bought a lesson. Twice, a school counselor recommended a behavioral evaluation. Twice, Jennifer signed the paperwork and never followed through. The form sat forgotten in a kitchen drawer while Tyler kept sliding further from anyone who might have stopped him. Teachers noticed the pattern long before the courts did. One of his 6th grade teachers later told a local reporter, off the record, that Tyler wasn't a bad kid in the way people meant when they used that phrase. He was a kid who had figured out correctly that there was no floor under his behavior. No matter what he did, someone would smooth it over. That lesson, learned early and reinforced constantly, is what eventually walked into Judge Courtroom in designer sneakers. It wasn't that Tyler had never been given rules. He had plenty of them, at least on paper. A chore chart taped to the fridge that nobody checked. A screen time app that Jennifer had installed and then quietly disabled after the first week of arguments. A curfew that existed mostly as a suggestion. Structure without follow-through isn't structure at all. And somewhere along the way, Tyler had learned to read the difference between a rule and a threat that would never be carried out. He treated every boundary in his life the same way, as an opening offer to be negotiated down to nothing. His mother wasn't a bad person, and it's worth saying that plainly. She worked long hours at a marketing firm to keep the house they'd kept after the divorce. She showed up to every one of his basketball games, even when he barely acknowledged her from the bench. And she genuinely believed, in the way exhausted parents sometimes talk themselves into believing, that things would sort themselves out eventually. What she couldn't see, because she was too close to it, and too afraid of losing what little connection she still had with her son, was that eventually had already come and gone, more than once. And she'd paid to make it disappear every time. Don't scroll past the subscribe button just yet. This story turns a corner fast. The woman who wouldn't back down. Next door lived Eleanor Rodriguez, 72, a retired ESL teacher who'd spent 30 years turning her backyard into something close to sacred. Her late husband, Eduardo, had planted the first rose bush there in 1983, the week they moved in, working the dirt with bare hands because they hadn't yet saved up for gardening tools. Over 4 decades, that garden grew into a living archive of their marriage. Including a deep burgundy rose, Eduardo spent nearly 10 years crossbreeding, which he named, with a deliberate misspelling, after his wife. Eleanor lived modestly. She drove Eduardo's old Honda, wore dresses 2 decades out of style, and clipped coupons without complaint. But the garden always got whatever it needed. Every morning, rain or shine, she spent 3 hours out there talking to Eduardo the way she had for 30 plus years, just now without an answer coming back. She'd spent her career being endlessly patient with frightened, homesick immigrant kids learning a new language. So when Tyler moved in next door, she tried the same patience on him. She introduced herself with a plate of pan dulce. She asked him, gently, to keep the noise down during her morning hours. He posted a video mocking her that same night. The harassment built slowly. Basketballs slammed against the fence, trash dumped in her flower beds, mocking clips of her accent captioned for laughs. She tried talking to Jennifer twice. Both times she got an apology and no actual change. Former students of hers, some now in their 40s, still sent her holiday cards every year, thanking her for believing in them when nobody else had. She had spent a career being that kind of adult. Tyler had never met one before. Then one morning she walked outside in her robe, coffee in hand, and found every rose bush wilting, poisoned overnight with industrial weed killer. 40 years of work, including the one rose that existed nowhere else on earth, destroyed in a single night. She didn't cry right away. Neighbors who saw her that morning said she just stood at the edge of the flower bed for a long time, coffee going cold in her hand, before she finally went inside and called her daughter. It wasn't until she was on the phone, trying to describe what she was looking at, that her voice finally broke. "They're all gone," she kept saying. "Eduardo's roses are all gone." Her daughter drove over within the hour and found her mother back outside, on her knees in the dirt, trying uselessly to prop the wilting stems back up, as though sheer will could undo what the chemicals had already done. It was her daughter who first suggested calling the police, and Eleanor who refused, insisting she didn't want to make a bigger mess of a family that clearly already had enough problems. It took another 2 weeks and a second act of harassment, trash dumped directly onto the one surviving patch of marigolds, before Eleanor finally agreed that being kind about it hadn't worked, and it was time to try something else. If you're already rooting for Eleanor, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is why this case went viral. Caught on his own camera. Tyler didn't just do it. He filmed it, set it to music, and posted it with the caption, "Pranking my annoying neighbor. Old people are so easy to troll." He narrated the destruction like a nature documentary, while his followers flooded the comments with laughing emojis. A handful of viewers called it cruel. Those comments got buried and ignored. Neighbors forwarded the video to Eleanor, who watched her own garden's murder set to a trending sound. For the first time in her life, she filed a lawsuit, not out of spite, but because talking had clearly stopped working. She sued in small claims court for $3,200, covering replacement roses and the emotional toll of an irreplaceable loss. 3 separate horticulturists told her, if anything, she was underselling the damage. 40-year-old root systems in a decade-long hybridization project simply cannot be rebuilt. Her daughter urged her to ask for more. Eleanor refused. "I don't want that woman's money," she told her. "I want somebody to finally tell that boy no." To understand what happened next, you have to understand who was sitting on that bench. Judge had spent 25 years in courtrooms, the last 11 of them on the small claims and family docket, where she built a reputation as the judge who didn't perform outrage for the cameras. She simply didn't tolerate excuses. Colleagues described her as exhaustingly thorough. She read every file cover to cover before a hearing, not just the summary a clerk had prepared. Attorneys who appeared before her regularly warned newcomers, if you're planning to talk around the facts, she already knows the facts better than you do. She'd grown up the daughter of a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night And she'd said in a handful of interviews over the years that the thing she couldn't stand in her courtroom wasn't anger or even cruelty. It was waste. Wasted potential. Adults who had every resource in the world and used none of it to actually raise the child in front of them. She had seen thousands of families pass through her courtroom, and she had a low tolerance for parents who mistook spending money for parenting. Over more than 20,000 cases, she developed something like a sixth sense for the difference between a kid who'd made one bad decision and a kid who'd never once been told no. Something about this file, the casual cruelty in the video, the age of the victim, the flat refusal to apologize, pushed her research staff to dig further the night before the hearing. And what they found stopped her cold. Younger attorneys who clerked under her described a very specific pattern to how she worked a case like this one. She never raised her voice at the start of a hearing, no matter how the file read beforehand. She wanted to hear both sides speak in their own words first, uninterrupted, before she let herself react to anything. It was only once the excuses started, once someone in her courtroom tried to talk their way around a fact she already knew, that the temperature in the room would change. Her former clerks called it the pivot, and they said you could set a clock by it. Patient, patient, patient. And then a single sentence that ended the negotiation entirely. She had also, over the years, developed a quiet reputation for follow-through that set her apart from judges who simply issued a ruling and moved on to the next case on the docket. Vonda was known for scheduling check-in hearings on cases involving minors, specifically because she didn't trust a single ruling, however forceful, to actually change behavior on its own. A sentence without a follow-up is just a speech, she reportedly told a group of visiting law students the year before Tyler's case. 90 days later, that same philosophy is exactly why Tyler ended up back in her courtroom to prove the work had actually been done. They found the 3 prior incidents Jennifer had quietly paid to erase: school disciplinary records, the 2 ignored evaluation referrals, a pattern stretching back nearly 2 years of a child who had never once faced a real consequence for anything. The judge walked into court the next morning already furious, a rare state for a judge with 25 years and over 20,000 cases behind her. Her clerk later said she'd never seen her come in that quiet before a hearing. Usually she chatted for a minute or two while she got settled. That morning, she just read the file again, closed it, and said, "Let's go." Eleanor arrived first, moving carefully on knees worn down by decades of kneeling in soil, dressed in the same navy dress she'd worn to Eduardo's retirement party years earlier. Her daughter carried a folder, before and after photos, a printout of Tyler's video, statements from the horticulturist, and a photograph of Eduardo planting that very first rose bush in 1983. Then came Tyler and Jennifer, and the room's whole mood shifted. Tyler strolled in with one AirPod still hidden in his ear after a bailiff made him remove the pair. Phone tucked low, eyes on the screen, utterly unbothered by why he was there. Jennifer trailed behind, visibly panicked, reaching to fix his posture and pry the phone loose. He shrugged her off every time. An older man on the front bench, there for an unrelated hearing, later told a local news crew he'd never seen a kid walk into a courtroom looking that unbothered. Most kids are terrified, he said. This one looked like he was waiting for a table at a restaurant. Subscribe now, because Judge Team was about to lay every one of those buried incidents out in the open. It's literally just flowers. Eleanor's testimony brought the room to tears. The 40 years, Eduardo, the morning spent talking to a man who could no longer answer. When she played Tyler's video, laughter and all, the gallery gasped out loud. Tyler sat through it slouched, sighing, mouthing along to a song only he could hear. Jennifer's defense leaned on his age. He's 12. He doesn't fully understand consequences, and tried to minimize the loss outright. They're just plants. they can be replaced. Judge didn't let that stand. At 12, children absolutely know right from wrong. Your son didn't just understand what he was doing. He filmed it, posted it, and laughed while an elderly woman's life's work died in front of her. That's not a prank. That's cruelty as entertainment. She turned to Tyler directly. Do you understand that what you did was wrong? His answer silenced the room. I mean, it's literally just flowers. She can buy more. It's not that deep. You do not want to miss what Judge said next. Go ahead and subscribe before you keep reading. Jennifer shut her eyes. Eleanor's daughter gripped her mother's hand, and Tyler, somehow reading the silence as agreement, kept going. Whatever. Boomers are so dramatic. It's giving Karen energy. Even the bailiff, 20 years on the job and famously unshakable, was seen shaking his head. Court reporters in the room said it was the first time in months anyone had heard the gallery audibly gasp twice in one hearing. The ruling judge stood, something she reserved for moments that truly demanded it, and her voice came out low, level, and unmistakably furious. Let me tell you what I understand. I understand you're 12 and already on a path to becoming someone nobody wants to be around. I understand your mother has failed you by never teaching you that actions cost something. I understand you think your followers make you important. They don't. They're watching you fail, and tomorrow they'll be watching somebody else fail instead. What you don't understand is that you are not special. You're a child who has been allowed to act like a tyrant, and that ends today in my courtroom. She read the buried incidents into the record one by one: the smashed window, the torch shed, the vandalized mailbox, and Jennifer visibly collapsed inward as she realized none of it could be quietly paid away this time. You've been writing checks instead of raising a child, Vonda told her. The checks just ran out because nothing you own can buy back what he destroyed. Then came the sentence, the full $3,200 in damages, the maximum allowed. 40 hours of supervised garden restoration across 10 straight Saturdays, no phone allowed. A handwritten apology letter, no typing, no help. Permanent deletion of his TikTok account. A 6-month social media ban that Jennifer herself would be held in contempt for failing to enforce. And finally, in order that the long overdue behavioral evaluation actually gets scheduled this time, with a follow-up hearing in 90 days to confirm it happened. Tyler broke down, not over Eleanor, but over losing his account. Jennifer sobbed that she only wanted her son to like her. Vonda's answer landed quiet and final. He doesn't need a friend. He needs a parent. You've been enabling this, and it stops today. This is the part people replay the most. Subscribe if you want to see exactly how it ends. Sit down and be quiet, she told him as he tried one last protest. You're going to learn that the real world doesn't care about your followers, your excuses, or your attitude. You're going to spend 40 hours rebuilding what you broke. And maybe, somewhere in there, you'll learn respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by giving it first. Case dismissed. 5 seconds of total silence. Then the whole courtroom rose to its feet. 10 Saturdays. The first Saturday was rough by any measure. Tyler showed up 40 minutes late, in the wrong shoes, without gloves, radiating contempt for the whole exercise. Eleanor didn't yell and didn't coddle him. She handed him a trowel, pointed at a bare patch of dirt, and said, "We start here." He complained about everything for the first 3 hours. Around hour 4, he asked when he could leave. Eleanor told him he was free to go anytime. She'd simply mention it to the judge and he could explain the walkout himself. He stayed. The second Saturday was quieter. He still didn't say much, but he showed up on time and in the right shoes. Eleanor noticed and said nothing about it, just handed him gloves and got to work beside him. By the third Saturday, something had begun to shift almost against his will. Eleanor talked while they worked, not lectures, just stories about Eduardo, about the terrified kids she used to teach who left her classroom fluent and confident years later, about the 10 years and 11 failed attempts it took Eduardo to perfect that one burgundy rose. Tyler, who had spent his life being talked at, discovered he didn't mind being talked to. By the fourth and fifth Saturdays, he started asking small questions. Why some soil felt different than others. Why she watered in the morning instead of at night. What the burgundy rose had actually looked like before it died. Eleanor answered every one like it mattered, because to her, it did. By the sixth Saturday, he was the one asking questions unprompted. And by the eighth, he'd started showing up early. If this story is landing differently than you expected, that's the point. Subscribe for the rest of it. The final two Saturdays were almost quiet in a different way than the first had been. Not sullen quiet, working quiet. The kind of quiet Eleanor said she remembered from working alongside Eduardo decades earlier. Two people who didn't need to fill every silence with words. 90 days later. At the follow-up hearing, Tyler walked in without headphones and asked to personally hand Judge the folder documenting his completed hours, his handwritten letter, and the evaluation report Jennifer had finally scheduled. The evaluation turned up something real, an undiagnosed attention disorder layered under an unaddressed grief response to the divorce and his father's absence. Not an excuse, the evaluator was careful to note, but a piece of the picture. Nearly $7,000 in quiet payoffs had never once looked at. Judge read it slowly, then looked at Jennifer. This should have happened 2 years ago. I won't pretend that's not a real failure, but late is still better than never. She ordered a year of family counseling at Jennifer's expense and closed the case. Eleanor sat in the gallery that day, not because she had to, but because Tyler had personally asked her to come. What came after? The clip crossed 80 million views within days, sparking debate everywhere from parenting forums to national news. Some calling Vonda a long overdue voice for accountability. Others arguing the sentence was too harsh for a kid still figuring himself out. That argument became part of the story too, playing out in comment sections for weeks. Clips of Judge ruling were replayed in classrooms by teachers who said they'd never had an easier time starting a conversation about consequences. Parenting groups picked the case apart from every angle. Some pointed to the diagnosis that came out 90 days later as proof the whole ruling had been too harsh, too fast, aimed at a kid whose real problem hadn't even been named yet. Others pointed to the exact same fact and argued the opposite, that it had taken a furious judge in a lawsuit from a 72-year-old widow to get a struggling kid the evaluation his own mother had been handed twice and ignored twice. Child psychologists were quoted on both sides. A few school districts reportedly used the case, anonymized, as a talking point in staff trainings about the difference between consequences and cruelty. Eleanor, for her part, never gave a single interview about it. Reporters who tracked down her address were turned away politely but firmly. She told one persistent producer that the story wasn't really hers to sell, and that anything worth saying about it, she'd already said to a judge and to a 12-year-old with a trowel in his hand. Her daughter later said the only part of the online frenzy that ever seemed to genuinely please her mother was learning that a few viewers, inspired by the story, had gone out and planted rose bushes of their own. But the real ending happened quietly, over 10 Saturdays, in Eleanor Rodriguez's backyard, where a boy who'd never faced a real consequence slowly learned to sit with an old woman's grief instead of mocking it. By the final Saturday, he was asking her to teach him a little Spanish, while she taught him how to graft a cutting and read soil pH. Together, they planted something new where the burgundy roses used to be. Eleanor named it Segunda Oportunidad, second chance. Jennifer kept every counseling appointment for the full year and later admitted the hardest, most necessary thing Judge ever did for her family was refuse to let her buy her way out of actually raising her son. Tyler's old TikTok never came back. A year later, with his mother's blessing, he started a new one, this time about rose grafting, garden care, and, every so often, a story about a neighbor named Eleanor and the judge who wouldn't let him off easy. I'm Judge Vonda. Subscribe because there's always another story like it worth telling.